Serious, people who suffer from mental health disorders, what was your this isn't normal moment? When I started crying over my math homework and the frustration that no matter how hard I tried to stop doing it I just couldn't, and there was a huge weight in my chest and I ended up hyperventilating and crying on my room's floor. Over 2 math problems that weren't even mandatory. I couldn't stop crying. Everything felt awful and I thought about death more often than not. This year, I decided to try to quantify my mental health. I've cried on 19 separate days so far in 2020 and had some thoughts or other about suicide on 26. My memory is gone thanks to meningitis. But it was almost immediately after I woke up from a coma. The world looked different. I can't keep track of time correctly anymore, it all kind of blurs together in my head. Sometimes I just stop. Freeze up in the middle of doing something or talking, anywhere from a few seconds up to 13 minutes at the long end. Like someone hit the pause button, then I just go right back to what I was doing or saying, even if the person or people I was talking to has moved on. I'm conversation had just left and put a sticky note on the brim if my hat that they waited 3 minutes and had to go. Sorry. But the worst is the itch. From the day I woke up till now it feels like I have an itch inside my skull that I can't reach. Like my brain actually itches. That one takes the cake. I held my baby as he cried and imagined dropping him onto an upturned knife in the dishwasher. PND is f-king awful. Cleaning a knife. I held it upwards at some point to look closer at a tiny speck and had this sudden urge to stab my eye with it. Still hurts to think of the effort it was to just put it down. I realized I hadn't eaten anything in over a week because getting out of bed and going to the kitchen was too difficult. I'd been drinking out of the sink when I went to the bathroom. But I was still massively dehydrated. I ended up spending a week in a crisis unit where they diagnosed me with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. They got me on meds, which was helpful. It's still an uphill battle sometimes. When I sat down and figured out how many of my grandma's pills I would have to take to die in my sleep, I was spending all my time alone in tears, regretting every aspect of my life and considering myself a complete waste of space. I figured out roughly how long it would take for me to fall asleep and that I could die well before anyone came home from the store. It was hard to stop myself from doing it, but I didn't know how my mom would react to finding my body. Thank God I didn't do it. Things have really turned around since I was a teen. I started self-harming. I remember the first time I did it. I was 11. Scared shitless and knowing full well that it was not normal and people were going to think I was even more of a freak than ever. But that knowledge wasn't enough to stop me. That scared me. Not having control and having to resort to doing that just to feel the slightest bit better. That was the moment I kind of knew I was screwed in the long run. Fun part of my autistic traits. I literally can't tell the difference between normal, sad, and depressed. I have no frame of reference for behavior that is normal and behavior caused by my mental disorders. When, at 10 years old, I looked at my mom while tying my shoes and say I want to die so bad. Holding knives against my heart at night before 12 years old. Wishing I was strong enough to do it. I had a horrific panic disorder. All day. Every day. Missing months of school and in and out of the hospital. I finally got diagnosed and treated. And while it hasn't been a perfect ride, I can proudly say that I haven't had a panic attack in years. And by 13 I was back at school and thriving. I'm 27 now. And so grateful to have gotten to where I am now. I think part of this story falls under disabilities more than mental health. But the two are intertwined and I couldn't tell the mental health side without explaining the disability side, or it won't make sense otherwise. I suffer from a very unique and rare extreme variant of dysgraphia, which affects translation of my thoughts to a structured format on paper. Storytelling and conversation in writing are fine. Which is how I'm telling this, and you'll probably notice some run-on sentences and grammar choices that are a bit odd as a result. To put this into perspective of just how severe it is, I'll reference the cognitive IQ test I took that ended up revealing that this was the problem, since even I didn't understand what was happening. IQ test for dummies explanation is that your IQ test is divided into multiple sections for different topics. These numbers are averaged to get your total IQ. When I took the test, I tested at an IQ of about 122 on a scale where 100 was average. And my upper end was my verbal communication at 139 with a 5-point margin of error, followed by verbal comprehension and written comprehension. So my understanding skills and ability to communicate and grasp what I was being presented with were all present. But my written communication, my ability to put my thought adequately onto paper, was at around 87. Normally more than a 10-point gap between any two sections counts as a disability and qualifies for an IEP in the education system under the program Child Find in America. A 50-point gap, as it was put by the person who presented the results to us, was so unbelievably rare for this specific disorder. He had maybe heard of 4 or 5 cases like this. He likened me writing in a structured format to asking a blind person to point at the correct object in a room. My writing level had not progressed beyond a 5th grade aptitude. On to the story now. This had been going on for about 8 years by the time we reached this story, since I was never diagnosed with it until high school. I started failing my classes because teachers couldn't fudge my grades anymore because they knew I understood the topics when they spoke to me. I'm still upset I even got this far anyway, and I started having a downward spiral in 9th grade. I started eating more when I did eat, but having less meals overall, and my daily schedule became incredibly unbalanced. I started developing aches from the stress, and my body went into perpetual fight or flight as an adrenal response to the mental stress of not really having an escape anymore. My parents weren't bad or especially mean or cruel, but they were very matter of fact when it came to my grades. So as my grades started to fall, I had less and less pleasant interactions with them, since when they asked what was wrong or why there was a problem, I couldn't give them an answer cause I didn't know. I had a teacher who was afraid of students, OCD, and legitimately out to get me. If you want more on that, ask me in replies and I'll tell the story, but it would double this post's length. It took me until I was sleeping over 14 hours a day and still exhausted, legitimately sleeping through every class, before I realized something was wrong and out of the ordinary, and I went to my parents and said I thought I was getting depressed. And they thought about it and acknowledged something wasn't right, thankfully. They took me to see a psychiatrist who agreed I was exhibiting depressive symptoms, and they recommended me to get the cognitive test I mentioned above. By the time we got through the wait list, it was past halfway through my 2nd year in high school, almost a full 11 months later. Since the waitlist for the test was 9 months and it took 2 before we got the results, the test took 5 hours to take and complete and was conducted in a hospital ward. By this point I had also been to see multiple specialists, including a geneticist, cardiologist, rheumatologist, and a sleep study to try and explain my constant exhaustion. It took going to a rheumatologist who saw all the previous tests conducted by the other specialists before he suggested we look into a subset disorder of amplified musculoskeletal pain syndrome. And all the pieces started to click together. We talked a bit more about the disorder with him and determined that while my body was attempting to react to the strain of the stress I was experiencing at the school without getting the support I needed and consistently feeling like I was the problem factor, the depressive episode and cortisol flood in my body had damaged my nervous system, causing a subset of AMPs called reflex neurovascular dystrophy, which, in addition to causing decreased energy, less restful sleep and amplified pain response, also inhibits my arteries and veins' ability to dilate properly. The disorder is technically manageable but incurable. The damage is in the spinal column between the autonomic nervous system and active nervous system. This is now 4 years later from when I left the high school after they still failed to support me. I have made a nearly full recovery from the mental illness section. I'm no longer depressed and was briefly on medication for bipolar type 2 while I was undergoing psychotherapy. But the medical issues persist. And to try and give everyone an idea of what it's like in my head, if this explanation still doesn't make much sense. Imagine you're taking Spanish as your second language and your first language is English, but you write your notes in Latin. The amount of mental effort it takes me to translate my thoughts into writing the same way you'd be able to makes writing feel like a second language to me. TLDR, my that isn't normal. moment was learning that my entire life in the education system was an uphill battle because of an undiagnosed academic disability that caused me to have a downward spiral of depression and medical disorders. I was having daily and even hourly panic attacks and PTSD episodes. Nightmares every time I fell asleep. Too much anxiety to leave the house. When there were moments where, no matter what I was doing or thinking, my brain would just pop the thought of me drowning myself in there. I knew I was down. But when I has no control of that, and it just kept happening, over and over, I knew I had to get help. Depression is a sneaky bitch. Being thrown into the back of an ambulance hours after doing a 3 AM grocery run in another state, with lots of other adventures in between. When I was younger, my family always joked I had OCD. I never believed them until one day I spent 4 hours cleaning the blinds in my bedroom because I couldn't do anything else until they were done. My head just needed it to be done and makes my head feel all weird. I don't know how to explain it. So anyway, halfway through it kind of clicked that it wasn't normal to be unable to do anything until I'd cleaned for 4 hours. That was about 10 years ago. I got diagnosed with OCD last year. It was hard to realize how far I was gone. My mind wouldn't let me recognize that I can't fucking stop. I was deeply convinced that I could just snap out of it. I was too sick to realize how sick I was. I was at a point where I was severely bulimic. Would eat all day and only sleep for a few hours, just to wake up and be pee again. It took everything from me. My life shrinked into nothing but binging and purging. My weight was dropping. Every day and every idea of time became a blur, and I was so malnourished and sleep deprivated that I started hearing voices and seeing shadow figures in the corner of my eye. It got to a point where I wouldn't react to my mum calling my name because I was convinced it wasn't real because I heard her calling me all the time. I still convinced myself that this wasn't too much of a deal somehow. It was when I was sent inpatient that I realized I couldn't not purge. Even if I tried, I couldn't even keep food down because I started vomiting automatically. Gross time, and somehow very scary to be confronted with the ugly truth that you haven't only lost control over your own actions but also didn't even notice this. I was in the midst of a long and painful breakdown due to crippling anxiety and phobias. I was sitting in the car with my husband and suddenly this sensation came over me like heaviness or numbness, and I got really confused about who I was. I had had a dream the night before about being in the army, and suddenly I wasn't sure if that was reality and this was a dream or vice versa. I didn't feel real. I felt like I was floating away. I was scared out of my mind and called out to my husband who was driving, but my voice didn't sound like words, and he turned to me and started talking to me, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. Then it just stopped again. It was like 10 seconds of pure fear. Someone told me it's called depersonalization or derealization. It happened about 10 more times before I got help. I had lots of small ones. In 3rd grade, my teacher told the class she would know if we were lying because we wouldn't be making eye contact. That was the first time I realized I was supposed to make eye contact with people. My mom telling me in high school I was supposed to be able to tell my friends about my problems, and I realized I didn't have any friends close enough to do that. When I visited home for the first time and realized the homesick feeling I had been having since I was a kid wasn't normal homesickness. When everyone is awkward at school but end up growing up and socializing with everyone, female or male, but you end up the only who hasn't and continue to be awkward and having real trouble talking to people. Kept having moments similar to a migraine aura, where my family and closest friends would suddenly seem like total strangers, or environments would suddenly become unfamiliar. It still happens. And while it's just as scary as the first time, recognizing what is happening helps me cope until the feeling goes away. The main one is finding no joy in anything. The other one is when I'm at my worst. I have a thing where I have to check to see if I'm dressed, as I feel like I'm not, even though I know full well that I am. Waking up feeling numb every day. IDK, what f***ing mental disorder I have. I've never seen a doctor, but like I always put stuff in pairs. People, food, colors, animals, even letters, musicians, everything. Car types, like me and my best friend. Bananas and avocados. Apples and peaches. Like everything comes in a pair. Everything has what my mind calls its like. Mint is like cinnamon. Chocolate is like vanilla. It's kind of just like opposites. But it calms me down if like I have a Honda and my friend has a Nissan because they are pairs. Or my friend's favorite color is green and my favorite color is pink. And it always changes up in my mind. I'm never set on just one way for things to be like. It's not f***ing normal. Sometimes I stay up all night looking for the perfect pair for some stupid tea like coconuts. I couldn't decide if it was like aloe or like watermelon. It's so goddamn stupid. I hate that I do it. I can't live a normal life because I'm constantly thinking. Apple is like Samsung and Motorola is like LG. That kind of weird shit. When I was driving my car, with my younger brother in it, and had the sudden impulse to crash my car going 60-ish miles an hour into a large beam supporting a bridge. I'm not sure if I have a health disorder, but every time I'm bored in public, I just enjoy thinking about different and effective ways to kill them. I brought it up once, and regretted it immensely. When I straight up had a major panic attack in the middle of Walmart. I was fine. Getting some milk. You know, normal stuff. But as soon as I grabbed the milk, the whole place started spinning. I started to panic and I had no idea why. I just collapsed on the floor in the fetal position, just shaking and sobbing. And I was just fine before I went to Walmart. People called 911. Somehow I blacked out and woke up in an ambulance. It wasn't taking me to a hospital. They were just monitoring me. But turns out I have a disorder that makes me have major panic attacks at random times. I have gotten more control over it. But it still happens. They said it could be a form of PTSD I got from my childhood. I'm always scared that it might happen again. The fact that I, after knowing my classmates for 10 years, still couldn't walk into a part or event with them without being about to die mentally. Autism. Feeling like killing myself. Then an absolute euphoria 30 seconds later. For no reason. I came home one day to find that the ice dams on my roof had taken all the gutters off my house. I immediately started bawling and my first thought was that I was a horrible mother. After about half an hour of ugly crying like my life was over, my 14-year-old says to me, "Mom, isn't that why you have homeowners insurance?" I booked an appointment with a psychiatrist later that week when I realized that the weather gutters weren't connected to my parenting abilities. Turns out I have bipolar 2 disorder. I'm now medicated and much more stable. And X200B. Having a panic attack or expecting one every day isn't normal. There's been a few situations where I've been reminded I'm different from the people around me. But the first and probably worst one was when I was 13 or 14 and at some kind of charity event to raise money for some baby that was blind, deaf, dyslexic and had cerebral palsy. He really drew the short straw on the genetics. And by the end of the night I think something like 5k had been raised to give him sensory experiences. Now I still think I'm in the right. But the people around me looked at me like I was some kind of monster. I just don't think that kid is ever going to amount to anything. Living life as a vegetable and draining charity money until he dies, likely at a young age anyway. So I said he should just be euthanized and the money given to some place where it actually matters. Made perfect sense to me. But nobody else saw it that way. So, I have a lot of them. Feeling completely numb. Having no highs or lows anymore, just pure numbness. Being constantly tired even though I slept between 8 and 16 a day. Not wanting to live but also not wanting die. A little later, after my numbness got better, extreme mood swings. That went -100 to 100 in on second, and that multiple times a day. Not seeing any value or reason in anything. Just everything seemed useless. Not being able to let anybody touch me because then I would get flashbacks that I didn't recognize as flashbacks at the time. Having absolutely no sex drive at all. After my tiredness got a little better, not being able to sleep at all, or if then just for 4-5H and with having trouble to fall asleep. Sleeping through the night and waking up the next day, like staying awake. Feeling constantly lost or overwhelmed with absolutely everything. Went to therapy and it got better. I'm still not great, but definitely better. Stay strong, guys. You made it this war, you can do the rest as well. Probably like the third time I ruined my life and had to start over completely from square one because of some dumb impulsive decision I made. I found myself crying while vacuuming. I just couldn't believe how sad I was. My mind was firing through thoughts so quick I couldn't actually breathe. Also, I started referring to myself as we. Therapy works, kids. Oh boy. For me at least. There was no single moment. More a progression over time of events accumulating until I finally accepted that my brain is FK'd in a variety of ways. I've gotten quite the list of diagnoses since I started therapy last summer. One that really sticks out to me in terms of my social anxiety is missing out on so many fun things growing up out of anxiety and terror. The county fair is huge in my little rural hometown. And all my friends showed and sold animals. All my schoolmates would go and have a blast. I never went once. My entire childhood. I skipped the fair every year. This was just one of many events I skipped out on. Sometimes I feel like I threw away the majority of my childhood TBH. Stroke. I passed out at work after what I now know was an anxiety attack. For me it wasn't like a moment. It was more like realizing that you are alone while it was supposed to be a really crowded area. I come from a very broken home. I'm diagnosed with major depression and anxiety. I have panic attacks now and then. Since my family is not a very united one. Mom religious AF. Detached brothers. Absent father. Extended family practically inexistent. No grandmas or grandpas, and I'm pretty introvert. I didn't realize something was wrong with me. But even with my decayed mental health, I'm a high-functioning human being. I could be working, cry in the bathroom on my break, having a panic attack on the bus, cut myself, bury my nails in my skin until I bleed and go back to work as if nothing happened. I started dating, a messed up relationship just like anything else on my life, and the disorders just got worse. I didn't realize that it wasn't normal or healthy until I knew my current BF. He started by being my friend and gained my trust. He treated me like he was afraid I would broke or something like that and started asked about my health. I was in a poor health, underweight and tired, and started checked on me. One day he hugged me and stated that I needed to eat more. He procured that kind of care towards me, and I, being clueless AF, didn't understand why. My BF explanation years later was because he was worried about me as a person. He knew I was sick and he couldn't understand why I was still acting normal. So one day I had a huge breakdown with the guy I was dating at the time, and he get back at me asking me if I would change him for my friend. He told me that I was too troubled to be worth it and I should stay with my friend. It broke my heart, but then I realized that I didn't feel good in my life. I didn't like anything. I didn't like to eat or to do stuff. I just existed. I broke up with the guy. I started dating my current BF and he started taking care of me. I realized a lot of things that were part of my depression and anxiety, and my BF helped me to look for professional help. On therapy I realized more and more things that weren't normal. I ask often to my BF is something as normal or not. I'm so lucky that he is so patient with me because he has helped me a lot. So yeah. Professional help and unconditional help from a former stranger helped me to realize that it wasn't normal. Moving abroad. Befriending with people who had these issues and knew that they weren't normal. And also my new school dealing with it more openly. Being out of a toxic environment that affected me a lot. 2. When I fell, fainted, almost, in the school auditorium, overwhelmed because it was too loud and there were too many people. But everyone else was just standing around normally. I almost rear-ended a car that stopped suddenly in front of me. I had to hit the brake real hard. Tires screeching and everything. Instead of being afraid or even angry, I felt nothing at all. That does not seem like a normal reaction. I was getting ready for school and my socks felt so uncomfortable on my feet. No adjusting or trying on other pairs made them feel better. I started sobbing because I thought about how I'd be fixated on it all day at school and started to have a panic attack. Very much not normal, and thank God I don't feel like that often anymore. The first time I truly realized something was wrong, aside from my constant gender dysphoria, was when I was sitting as a rider in my own head while loading a rifle to commit suicide. Looking back, I was able to figure out that I'd been suffering from depression since at least age 10. When I attempted suicide the first time, that also coincided with when my dysphoria started getting bad, even though I didn't know what it was at the time. TBH, I don't know if they are mental issues. If I get stressed, my whole body starts to shiver, which turns into tremble and then more like me having a stroke. It looks very scary in public since I get stressed over many things. Another thing are my hallucinations, but I really don't want to talk about them. I had PTSD from a shooting. I realized it when I was an insomniac for 1 week, having nightmares of people bleeding out on the grass, laying in bed and having your brain turn on you, calling you names, telling you you're worthless. It's like having a tiny bully inside your head and you don't know how to stop it. I realized that it was not normal to have suicidal thoughts and cry every night.